The AFC West is home to the defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs, and now it's going to be up to the Raiders, Broncos, or Chargers to try to dethrone the Chiefs' reign on the AFC West. And newsflash, that's not happening this season. Welcome on into GoldSheet TV. I'm your host, Eric Pauly, with my co-host, Dan Alexander at Newbie Talks on Twitter. Briefly want to remind everybody before we get into it, for starters, liking and subscribing liking this video and subscribing to the channel is the best way to support us. Secondly, all three GoldSheet products, GoldSheet Extra and Confidential, are now one product, one price, $149 until July 16th, when that price will go up. And number three, all the LTS picks that were on GoldSheet.com are now on WagerTalk.com. Same exact service, same exact product, same exact picks, except different website, WagerTalk.com. All right, Dan, now let's get right into it. Talking AFC West, of course, we're going to start with the Kansas City Chiefs. They're minus 165 favorites to win this division, which to me is probably pretty low. They're the favorites to win the Super Bowl. They're the favorites to win the AFC. What Patrick Mahomes has done as a starter in the NFL is unprecedented. 5 years as a starter, 5 AFC championship games hosted, 3 Super Bowl appearances, 2 Super Bowl wins. Then, plain and simple, I don't even think we need to spend that much time on this team, but the Chiefs are the team to beat again, correct?
I mean, you said it at the beginning. What's the point of even watching the video, right? Like, the Chiefs are winning this division. Chiefs are probably going to win the Super Bowl. No, all joking aside, it's just so tough to look at anybody in this division but the Chiefs when you look at what they do year in and year out. All right, so like what happened during the offseason? You see Frank Clark walking, and I feel like that's a bigger wave just by name alone. Like, if you look at the advanced stats for Frank Clark, you can kind of see why they were fine with not only having him walk, but having him walk to a division foe in the Broncos, who we'll talk about. And sure, they let Orlando Brown Jr. leave. He heads to the Bengals, and that's up front there. But they replaced him pretty quickly. They bring in Jawan Taylor, who's one of the better pass-blocking players in this league. So, other than that, what did they lose? Juju Smith-Schuster? Mecole Hardman? You still have Pat Mahomes throwing the football. So, and also, if there's anyone who I would trust replacing talent and finding diamonds in the rough that maybe other people aren't looking at, it is Andy Reid. I mean, if you look at his pedigree with players that he has been able to draft throughout his career, year in and year out, this guy is finding talent that maybe other people are passing over on. I think of Deshaun Jackson. I think of him bringing in LaShawn McCoy and the career that he had in Philadelphia. So, man, they're odds-on favorites for a reason to win the Super Bowl. There's nothing really glaring to me on roster turnover. So barring some serious injuries, I'm right there with you. All signs point to the Chiefs being that team again, and not only competing, but competing for the top record in the NFL. I would probably say, again, barring any wild injuries or any shakeups like that.
Yeah, 100%. So something that's like really important when analyzing teams is a luck factor. Right, like so many things, especially in like the fourth quarter of an NFL game down the stretch, like things can change on a dime, and whether that be because of poor play or because of like some unlucky circumstances. We saw like one-score games and winning one-score games, like the Vikings last year, having that ridiculous undefeated record, one-score game, 11 plus. Were they really such a good team? No, you really don't have a luck factor with the Chiefs outside of injury, right? Like, you obviously can't quantify injuries in the first place, because they happen as they happen. Violent sport, they're going to happen. But having Patrick Mahomes, and this is a stat that I've seen that's actually ridiculous. Last year, the Chiefs were 7-3 in one-score games, but in each of Mahomes' first 5 seasons, Kansas City is now 30-15 in close games with Mahomes as a starter. So that doesn't like exemplify how much quarterback, especially quarterback, is the great equalizer in all of sports. I don't know what else does. Your points on the replenishing of what they did, like getting Jawan Taylor, arguably even better than Orlando Brown, like doesn't even make a difference.
Agree
there. Bringing Donovan Smith, also from Tampa Bay, pretty good signing. They lose Juju. They draft Rashee Rice, who I think, if you're a fantasy guy, stash that man. I think he's a really good player out of SMU, a top-tier athlete. I'm a big fan. And like you said, Frank Clark lost him. Charles Omenihu had a better season from an advanced season last year. So, if you're just hating on Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs at this point, you're just honestly simply put a hater. Like, you're just hating to hate. If you have the Tom Brady effect where you just hate somebody winning so much so often because maybe they're beating your team, okay, understandable. Just admit that you're hating just to hate. In terms of like pricing for adding this team to like a portfolio, like obviously like the odds are not the most attractive considering that they are very likely to actually be a team to come out of the AFC and make it to a Super Bowl. But adding some Chiefs to your portfolio is just like adding like a FANG stock to your investment portfolio. At some point, you probably want to grab a little bit of Chiefs, right, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and that's why I love being on here with you, because you are a futures guy. You know, we talked about it when we were breaking down our last preview. For me, and the way that I bet, like unless I'm getting 2 zeros or 3 zeros after a number in the futures market, I usually don't add it. I would rather find a way to bet the team week after week, be it through prop markets, be it through another way. So as far as adding to a portfolio, that's where I always am going to defer to my man EP Eric Pauly, because it's not the way that I go about managing. I don't like tying up my money for an entire season. I would rather find plus money spots throughout the year to bolster my bankroll that way than tying it up and having this nice big portfolio. I know people love being able to lock in that profit, but as far as a buy low spot on the Chiefs to find the most value, unless you're picking their exact season wins, which still is juiced like crazy, I don't know if you can really find much value, at least for me.
Nah, it's a great point. I 100% agree. Again, unless you're going the hater route and betting an alternate under, that's probably going to be the best money you get on this team.
And if anybody wants to hate on the Chiefs, it's me. And as an Eagles fan, still reeling from that loss, how that was pass interference is beyond me. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the division. So I just got to let it go.
Quick side note, though, on the Chiefs. Have you watched Quarterback on Netflix yet?
I haven't, and I've now had it suggested to me for the 4th time, so I will be watching.
I caught the first episode last night, and the one thing that stuck out to me, you're just obviously great. You're seeing some in-depth NFL content. I recommend, but the rawness and the competitiveness of Patrick Mahomes, you see on camera. He is mic'd up in that Raiders game when they're down 17-0. Like, if you've ever had a doubt about this kid, like it'll be alleviated immediately. Again, I don't know how you have a doubt after 5 straight hosting AFC Championship games. Super Bowl two Super Bowl MVPs. But if you have a singular doubt in you still, it's once you watch Quarterback and that even just the first episode, you'll see that this kid is built different. I know we say that this guy's him, this guy's that. Patrick Mahomes is actually him. He is him.
Yeah.
But moving on to a team where a quarterback could be maybe him. They got Justin Herbert in the Los Angeles Chargers. They're a very interesting team to me. So in some ways, they overperformed last year, but at the same time, you could also argue they underperformed last year, added a ton of talent last year, but they also had one of the most injured teams in football. You had Herbert, who was hurt from week 2 on. Their rookie tackle, Rashawn Slater, who was hurt for a majority of the year, who was a really good player. J.C. Jackson, one of their big signings and trades, missed a lot of time. Mike Williams, one of their big weapons, missed a lot of time. So now coming to this season, the Chargers didn't really do much. They added Quentin Johnston in the draft, but in terms of free agency, they didn't go after any big names because they were probably cap tied. But the Chargers are getting progression guys who they picked up last year who were then hurt. Just considering kind of, the fact that they did nothing this year after still having a bad run defense, but are also now counting on guys who are injured to play well, which is a fair assumption to make because they're good players. I'm just curious to hear from you, that newbie, what do you think about the Chargers? I have mixed thoughts, but let's start with you. What are you thinking about this team?
Yeah, and you took the words out of my mouth, because really the question that I was going to throw right back was did the Chargers do really much of anything to make themselves markedly better on paper? And again, on paper is going to be what it is, but when adding a 31-year-old linebacker and Eric Kendricks is your big splash of the offseason, it's hard for me to get really excited about what they did gearing up a team that I think has and continues to have holes, and that's maybe why they can't quite get over the hump, that and having to face the Chiefs 2 times a year. But really, if you want to try and find something to get excited about, right, I think you look at their draft. I don't think they had a terrible draft. I do want to wonder if they knew that any team other than TCU played this past year. 3 of the 7 players they draft end up coming off of the Horned Frogs, one of them being a backup quarterback in Max Duggan, who maybe you're able to do some interesting things with him. But Justin Herbert is the straw that stirs the drink for this Chargers team. One thing I was excited about was adding Quentin Johnston to bolster that wide receiver depth, because as you mentioned, we know Keenan Allen's going to miss a stretch of games. We know Mike Williams is going to miss a stretch of games. You know, how many times do fantasy owners have to get burned by those two before we just say, all right, this is what it is? So I like adding that depth because Quentin Johnston, I think, is going to add some nice athleticism, add some nice youth to a receiving core that desperately needs it badly. And then day two, they bolster the defense a little bit. As you mentioned, that defensive front still has some major holes. They add Tui Poilotu, they add Hanley in the linebacking core, but they still need help in the D-line department. And it's just surprising to me that maybe they didn't go in a little bit more, because still as it stands today, you're looking at them with around $12 million plus in cap space. So I was underwhelmed in what they did the offseason, despite that solid draft that they have, but maybe some splashes could still be made, or maybe they gear up for before the trade deadline to bring somebody in, because they do have a little bit of cap space. So I was pretty surprised. I'm with you. Not really adding more depth up front, or even not depth, but some playmaking ability up front to go with what they have in a Bosa. I was pretty surprised by their offseason. Underwhelming to say the least.
Yeah, and I mean, like, again, I completely agree. They certainly could have used an interior defensive lineman. I mean, I don't think they could have made or paid as much as Cleveland did for a Dalvin Tomlinson, but could you imagine what like a Dalvin Tomlinson would do for this?
Would be big, yeah.
It would be massive. But my next thoughts on this team and the question, so much of it surrounds Brandon Staley. Comes in from the Rams to the Chargers 2 years ago. He makes a lot of fourth down decisions that kind of perplexed a lot of, older pundits and whatnot. But in reality, a lot of those decisions he made on fourth down were actually like plus EV decisions for scoring more points and winning more football games.
Yeah.
This past season, he opts, maybe he just heard the noise, or maybe like this first year he was just guessing and luckily had all these very good statistical type of plays, but he then made not the same decisions that ended up costing his team a lot of points, a lot of games, including that wild card game where they were winning 27-7 and then blew it to the Jacksonville Jaguars. No less, obviously, we talked about them last time. Jaguars not a team that you should be blowing a massive wild card lead with. They go out and hire Kellen Moore. Kellen Moore was kind of I don't want to say the architect of the Cowboys, because that offense, as we know, has been humming for the last couple of years. He's been the offensive coordinator. Obviously, he deserves some of the credit. But a lot of the moves that he made as a coordinator, I felt as if it were kind of like he was playing Madden in his basement, right? Like he was kind of just throwing this pass play deep. He was just running this offense that wasn't like as, I'd say nuanced as like an Eric Bieniemy style offense where every single play has a meaning behind it, versus just like calling deeper pass plays because you have a good quarterback, you have good receivers, like let's see what happens. Not really a game script. So Brandon Staley has to be on the hot seat, right? If this team starts off slow or just doesn't make the playoffs this year, he'll probably get the full season, but he's got to be on the hot seat, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that as we head towards the season and maybe have some game breakdowns, you and I will have some disagreements so the viewers can pick which camp they're going to be in. Hashtag Team EP, hashtag Team Newbie, because it's like you're stealing my notes. It's so tough for me to believe in a Brandon Staley coached team, because I actually thought with him, taking that back seat from only going by the chart, I think you're seeing this, and it was something that frustrated me with Doug Peterson and the Eagles coaching staff in his final season with the Eagles, is it seemed like they became too much by the book. You know what I mean? Where there's a little bit of paralysis by over-analysis, where you're only looking at the spreadsheet and what it tells you to do. You don't have a steady hand on the game. And that's Brandon Staley. It was all about the spreadsheet. And then, like you said, I don't know if it was internal conversations. I don't know if he heard the noise, but him going away from that and completely ignoring the spreadsheet, it cost him some big games. So I think you're seeing a guy who's really struggling to find what is the recipe to success. And the recipe to success for this team is take the training wheels off Justin Herbert, in my opinion. So in Brandon Staley's case, I feel like he's always just a botched decision away from costing his team a game. So I think Herbert taking on a little bit more of a field general role last season is what helped that success. And honestly, I think they would do themselves very well that in those stressful situations, to turn the headset off, maybe just have Brandon Staley identifying what he's seeing with coverages downfield. Let Herbert, who has continued to grow as a pro, who I had a lot of concerns of him coming out of Oregon. Now I'm a big-time fan of Justin Herbert and what he does. So I would give him a little bit more of an on-field general role and let him really embrace that, especially adding some talent in that wide receiving core, hopefully having some health, picked up in the wide receiving core. But all that said, I'm not rushing to bet any Chargers futures. It's not season win totals for me, not division plays. There's nothing really that I want to buy in on this team until I see how they look, maybe 3-4 weeks into the season.
I'm certainly not betting them to win any divisions, that's for sure. If they could sneak in and make the playoffs.
For damn sure.
But look at the market to make the playoffs or to go over the season win total. I'm not going to try to talk you out of that. It's a devil's advocate for both sides. For the side that the Chargers are going to be bad is that Staley isn't that good has shown that his decision-making isn't the greatest. Kellen Moore has shown that his offensive coordinating hasn't been the greatest, and they haven't really strengthened this team that was clearly flawed last year. Other end of the spectrum, they're expecting a lot of good contributors or key contributors, really, to be healthy this year because they just weren't last year. They didn't have them to use, so you can't really fully fault them. If
injuries even out a little bit.
Definitely, but Staley is a defensive-minded head coach, right? That's what he came in for. So the defense actually outside of the rushing defense is relatively solid, especially considering that they were missing J.C. Jackson for a lot of the year last year. So the argument can be made that these guys are healthy. They play better. Kellen Moore actually ends up being a plus. Justin Herbert's healthy. He has a lightning season with this offense and Staley's defense now and somehow stop the run. But again, the fact that they didn't add anybody to stop the run is my biggest concern. But like we both said, obvious reasons for some optimism, obvious reasons for some pessimism. Definitely not winning any divisions, so maybe look at to make the playoffs or win total. But arguably one of the most, I want to, definitely not polarizing, but now again, second year in a row, hyped up team is the Denver Broncos. Last year, the hype was solely about acquiring Russell Wilson. Not only was Denver a disaster last year in terms of structure and coaching, Russell Wilson himself was an absolute disaster, bar none. His advanced metrics under pressure in the pocket, decision-making, we're all terrible. We're talking bottom 30th in the league around in all those. It's only 32 starting quarterbacks. You guys are keeping tabs at home. Bring in Sean Payton. Now, again, the Broncos are this sexy pick to be really good because obviously Sean Payton is a huge upgrade to having an actual adult coaching the team now. But is Russ washed, and are the Broncos now actually what they were supposed to be last year, or is Russ washed? Is this team really probably on their last legs, and Sean Payton's not going to be enough for them?
Yeah, I don't know. Hopefully Russell was doing a hell of a lot of high knees on planes throughout the season because, as you mentioned, man, it just abysmal. Like saying that he was bad last season is like a disrespect to the word bad. I mean, it was unwatchable at times, and somehow we ended up with the Denver Broncos. It felt like being every single primetime game that we just had to watch the slop that they would put out there week after week. So yes, Sean Payton has to be a big-time upgrade to what we saw last season. And you look at what they did in the offseason, I don't think there was a player in free agency that they didn't kick the tires on. So clearly the Broncos organization isn't viewing this as and they needed to. Let's be real, they needed to spend the most money during the offseason. And I think too, a lot of that just has to do with when you're bringing in a guy like Sean Payton, you feel like there can be a quick turnaround. So clearly, organizationally, they're not saying this is a rebuilding year. They're putting the money where their mouth is, and then that puts a little bit more pressure, on my opinion, on Sean Payton coming out of retirement and joining up with this team. What they did in the draft, it was decent, but they were also kind of hamstrung because no first round pick due to that Russell Wilson trade. So I think they missed out on some nice talent, but I did love what they did on day 2 by picking up Marvin Mims. I think you're missing some serious star power on that offense. So I think that's a kind of guy who can make an impact right away. I think the one concern is that he's undersized, but if you throw the X-ray machine on him, you'll see he's got that dog in him to make up for it. I mean, he's got nice hands. He's a playmaker. And if his only knock is he's undersized, how many times have we seen athletic guys who maybe don't have the stature? Look at, I don't think he's a level of a Devontae Smith or anything like that, but you do see these guys be able to contribute in the NFL if they have speed. The thing for me offensively, though, and it could do a lot to assuage the issues of Russell Wilson, is figure out this running back room. You have Javonte Williams. He's coming off a torn ACL, PCL, LCL. So who knows if he's going to be even close to the player that he ended up being when he was at his zenith last season. And when you're heading into with like a potential Samaje Perine lead back situation, when you have quarterback concerns, what do you want? You want a solid tight end? You want a solid running back room? I'm not sure if we have that here with the Denver Broncos. So that's still my concern. Is Russell washed? It's hard to say after last season because it wasn't just physical, man. Like, it was mental. It seemed like his lack of preparation wasn't there. It seemed like the team didn't like him. And if you're a quarterback and the locker room doesn't like you, just ask Carson Wentz how that turns out. So I think there's some serious digging out of a hole that Russell Wilson has to do. And I don't know if the Denver Broncos really, even with the money they spent in free agency, gave him a nice enough shovel to dig out of that hole.
That's an amazing point, that last point you made, right? Like, okay, you look at advanced metrics, horrible season, Russell Wilson's pedigree, maybe you want to believe that he can perform better than those advanced statistics say that he was absolutely terrible last year. But that being said, if you have lost the locker room as a NFL quarterback, you're toast. You're not done back. You can get that elsewhere and you can revitalize the locker room somewhere else, but that's not happening. Two things about the Broncos that stick out to me. Obviously, again, everyone's talking about just Sean Payton and whatnot and Russell Wilson, but other just tidbits to keep in mind is number one, a luck factor. Denver had the worst injury luck in the NFL last year. That finished with the most adjusted games lost at wide receiver. Running back, it had 10 different offensive linemen start for a game. So Denver's injury luck, you just can't, it's terrible. So what did they do? They went on sides and players. Back to the fact that the Broncos spent the most money in free agency, which is $255 million. Over the last 6 seasons, every team or the team who has spent the most in free agency, like by dollar amount that year, has improved over their win total by at least 3 games and on average over 5 games per season. Right. So you're talking about a Broncos team that had an abysmal season. 3 is not gonna cut it for them. But if they do improve by 5 games, not only by the money they spent, but by also hiring again a legitimate quarterback, and then hopefully that they stay healthy, there is a reason for some optimism now. Like, obviously there is optimism from the media and some other pundits, but it's solely like Sean Payton. That is a piece of the pie, don't get me wrong, but like there are so many things that need to go right for that to still work out. There are also some things that need to go wrong. For example, I think the Ben Power signing was great, but I don't really love the Lynchy signing from San Francisco. I don't think he was that good, and the reason that San Francisco let him walk when they need some help on the offensive line, I think it's just telling of what they thought about him, and they've had him for the last 5 years. And I think that letting Draymond Jones walk and then signing Zach Allen from the Cardinals, I personally wouldn't have done that. I would have kept Draymond Jones, especially considering the contracts that they traded him. That each player ended up getting. But all things considered, like we mentioned, like my 2 things that I think are the biggest things are, again, the injury luck and whether or not the offensive line can really, stay healthy is going to propel this team. And like you said, the biggest point is not only whether or not Russ is washed, but if he actually lost this locker room, it doesn't matter if you bring in, Bill Belichick and Bill Parcells together to run this team. Like, Russell Wilson is not going to be the answer whatsoever.
Yeah, and I also think when you were chatting there, and we got to look at the Broncos' schedule, one of the things that you always are excited about as a fan when your team does have a stinker of a season is, all right, at least we get a last place schedule, right? But look at some of these teams they have to face. The problem is that all of the other teams that they're getting a benefit of in the last place schedule, you look at them playing a Bears team that should be improved. You look at them playing a Washington team that should be improved. You got to play the Packers who now, you got to play the Packers now who have a completely new look. You have to play the Lions who again, they're a team who continues to get a lot of love in the future marketplace. And you have a new Texans team that isn't a pushover that we talked about before either. So I just look at that schedule and playing the Jets doesn't seem as exciting anymore now that Aaron Rodgers is there. So I don't look at that as a last place schedule. So not only, you talk about the luck factor, you talk about them adding a potential 5 wins. There's too much hype around this offseason to buy in on the Broncos right now. Because even if you add the highest potential, they get 5 wins from their 3 last year, they're still lined at 8.5, and you're still losing by the hook on that play. So I think a great point by you, and I'm glad that you bring up the luck metric because I think there is something to that. That and turnovers are 2 things that I think you can never rely on being consistent. So, I think there's too much hype because of the Sean Payton signing that any value that you could potentially have preseason with the Denver Broncos, it's gone. Poof.
Yeah, no, 100%. And the last point that I will make on the Broncos is something that the GoldSheet actually has on our free picks page over at WagerTalk.com. Is one of our free plays that we have of the future on is one of my favorite ways to attack the Broncos. Like, this is a bullish way. We're talking like literally a 0.5 maximum unit bet here. Would be for the Broncos to end up finishing second in the AFC West. Okay. Obviously, we know they're not finishing first. The Chargers, of course, what we just made arguments for or against. I could obviously see them faltering. I could see them doing well. 270, if any stab at anything, we expected, or the play that we put out would be Denver to finish second in the AFC West at plus 270 is something where we found a little bit of value.
Nice.
They're not finishing last. Some of the metrics we mentioned would propel them to being better than Los Angeles heading into the season, but not by much. I mean, look at their win totals. They're right around the same. It could go either way. Plus 270. The price is what broke us and moved us. But moving on to the left in this division, we least the AFC North for the AFC West. Jimmy Garoppolo now and the Las Vegas Raiders. Let's start. Jimmy Garoppolo, obviously reunited with Josh McDaniels, spent time together in New England, know each other. When he's healthy and he's playing football, you can't deny that the locker room loves him and he's a good football player. He can't stay healthy. Another foot surgery this offseason. Dan, talk to me. Jimmy G, considering the injury potential that's been there his entire career, the Raiders are, yes, they should have moved on from Derek Carr, but Jimmy G is not it for them, right?
Yeah, and I get, okay, you move on from Derek Carr, but I don't know if this is that big of an upgrade. If anything, it's a lateral moving from Jimmy G, from Derek Carr. And for what it's worth, I'm not screaming from the mountaintops. I love Derek Carr as a quarterback, but I definitely didn't think he deserved as much flack as he got for the situation that he has been in his career. Think about the different head coaches that he's had. Think about the tumultuous off seasons that he's had to have. So I'm not really as down on Derek Carr as I feel like most people are. And then for me, I guess I'm not a Jimmy G guy. I don't know what the infatuation has always been with him. I don't know how many times we have to do the same song and dance with Jimmy G before we just...
I was just interjecting, saying the reason why you it's the handsome factor is why you don't resonate, is why you should resonate with Jimmy G.
And that's what happens. You know what I mean? All the hype around him was it was the porn stars that were reaching out to him in the off season. Now that he's in Las Vegas, we got to call it how it is here. So I'm with you, and I get it that he's solid. He's a good game manager. There aren't going to be many games that Jimmy G loses you. But I also want my quarterback to be able to win me some games. And I just don't know if Jimmy G has him in there. I think Derek Carr had more of a factor of that than Jimmy G does. However, I will say, I like what they did in free agency. It's not like anybody jumps off the page at you. Jimmy G obviously being the headliner of that. But Austin Hooper, he's a solid player. Adding Jacoby Myers, there's some nice playmaking ability for Jimmy G to get the ball to. You retain having Josh Jacobs. So this is a team that, I think there still is some excitement around. However, we're talking about them last for a reason. I think they're still a little bit of a ways away from from being that team. You know what I mean? I think, adding Austin Hooper to pair him with Michael Mayer, that'll be an interesting potential to do some 11 personnel there on the field, or 12 personnel on the field. They add a nice edge rusher from Texas Tech. But again, it's hard for me to get up for a Jimmy G team. It's especially hard for me to get up for a big Josh McDaniels team.
Yeah, and that's where I personally it's where the no matter where you want to slice it, the Raiders are a year away from being a year away. When it comes to Derek Carr, I think that what we mentioned about Russell Wilson, where if you lose the locker room, you're shot. The fact that Devontae Adams didn't even shed a tear when his best friend left, I think that says all you need to know about the tenure. If you want to talk about talent for talent, I would certainly agree that it's a 100% lateral move. But when it comes to a point there is a point of diminishing returns where, despite the talent, if you did lose the locker room, new scenery and new beginnings for different players and different people in general isn't always a bad thing. But like you just said, to end that there, though, Josh McDaniels, whether or not he is or isn't a good coach, all the signs are pointing to that he isn't. Obviously, as we've seen in anybody's life and history, you can progress and, learn and do better. But I am not backing a Josh McDaniels team, under any circumstance. What is there? What did he do to inspire enough confidence to me? Nothing was confidence inspiring enough to be okay, maybe he has some of it figured out. I'm not saying he's terrible, but I'm not thinking he's a good coach at this point.
Well, I'm with you. I never got the Josh McDaniels. When they signed him, it was okay, so what is this, just going to be a repeat of what happened with the Broncos? And again, I don't know how much validity there was to it, but I'm sure that you've seen the video of DJ Williams on some podcast where he's talking about when we were good with the Broncos is because we were cheating. He was we were basically doing Spygate Part 2. So I don't know how much truth there is to it, but it seems like the best time in Josh McDaniels' tenure as a head coach has been when there were some players who was saying that they weren't really doing things by the book. So I'm right there with you on him. As far as the outlook on the Raiders go, I think they are a team that once it gets in season, you're going to be able to have some nice value on, because there might be, especially early on in the year, where you see them as some nice underdogs. And I think this is going to be a scrappy enough team that they will cover some spreads. I'm just not sure how many of those games are going to translate to wins, having them competing for a playoff spot. But I definitely think whenever you're getting over a touchdown with this team, if the spot makes sense, it's a kind of team that I'm definitely going to want to try and be backing, at least from an against the spread perspective throughout the season.
And I 100% agree. Something with NFL to always consider, and people never forget, one of the most efficient market in sports will be the NFL, sides market. Mm-hmm. So if you see a team like the Raiders who are getting 7.5 points, even if it's against a really good team, depending again on the spot, obviously can't make any of these claims right away, but they're probably going to be valuing that 7.5 with that key number of 7 being covered, because that's probably going to close at least 7, if not 6.5. So definitely a team to keep an eye on. But then now we're ready to move on to the NFC. So our next show will be focusing on the NFC East and getting our teeth into our favorite division. There's going to be a conversation. So I know
there'll be some fireworks on that one.
Spoiler alert: Washington will not be improved this season. But we'll be at GoldSheet.com. All 3 products extra confidential. GoldSheet $149 through the 16th. Then that price actually bumps up to $169. So definitely take advantage. That now $149. Like and subscribe. Best way to help our channel grow. And also, all the LTS picks are now on WagerTalk. Same service, same exact picks, different website. Thank you, viewers. We'll see you guys next time talking to the NFC East.